I learned that the brain has this negativity bias. And so if we allow it, if we're not intentionally taking it in a different direction, it's going to go to a place of negativity. It seems like just naturally it tends to have this negativity bias as a protective mechanism. And so when we wake up and we're already thinking about our stressful day and the things that we have to do, and worried about maybe some conversations that we had with somebody yesterday, and worried about maybe finances or whatever it might be, then our brain stays in this place of negativity and stress and fight or flight. And we actually, through the research, I realized there are specific things we can do to take it out of that. We don't have to use a prescription medication to take your mind out of that place of anxiety.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Sparks of Gratitude podcast. I am your host, Randy Sparks, and today you're in for a treat. We have a special guest with us, Dr. Scott Noorda. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Randy. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, we appreciate you so much. You know, Dr. Noorda, and maybe I'll have him explain in more detail as we get moving, but he practices functional medicine. He's a longevity physician, and I'll have you kind of describe how you came into this practice. But really what attracted me to Dr. Noorda is his holistic approach to health, from, mind, body, spirit, and all together, and to live a good life, not prescribe medications for the rest of your life. And then how, from my observation, he lives the life he wants his patients to live, or hopes that they can live. And so maybe we'll go from here. Dr. Noorda, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll tell you, first of all, I grew up in northern Utah, ended up studying at BYU, studied neuroscience, thought I wanted to be a neurologist or a neurosurgeon. I was just so fascinated with the brain. And then went to medical school in Chicago, osteopathic medical school, and residency in Texas in family medicine. I found through the process that I enjoyed connecting with people on a deeper and more long-term scale, and primary care kind of fit that model really well. So going through residency and medical school, I kind of just put my head down and plowed through as you kind of have to do. And as I neared the end, I started to realize that family medicine, or medicine in general, wasn't exactly what I had in mind when I went into medicine. They were sort of ramping up our patients, as they do as you end residency, to show you how you can make money. You have to see a certain number of people, and realized that I couldn't make a really meaningful impact in people's lives in 5 to 10 minutes per visit. And so I tended to take longer, and then it made people in the waiting room upset. And so I kind of had to look outside of this sort of typical conventional model to see what else was out there. And found myself in North Carolina next in a group called Doctors Making House Calls. And that allowed me to kind of step out of the office, get into people's homes and their own living environments, assisted living and memory care facilities. And I was sort of that country doc. I'd throw everything into my Honda Pilot and drive out to people's homes or wherever I was going, and really enjoyed that process. And I should pause for a minute, just because you asked me to tell about myself, and really I can't tell about myself without telling about my family. So I'm married to Amy. She's amazing. She's been with me for a long, long time. We dated in high school, and she's kind of been the impetus behind a lot of the changes that we've made in our own lives, and kind of looking outside of the conventional box of medicine. And then we have a daughter and 4 sons. And so we took part of that family initially on that journey to North Carolina. And again, I started through this process, I realized I enjoyed spending time with people, but as I saw them day in and day out at kind of end stage chronic disease, I realized that our healthcare system was not doing a lot of favors to most of these people. Some of them were living longer, so their health span was long, or their lifespan was longer, I should say, but their health span, true quality of life, was pretty poor. And so I started to look at myself internally and think, is this what I would want? To live on numerous medications, maybe in a facility, maybe have a caretaker so that I can live longer. And it was in that process of sort of in my head trying to figure out, what do I do and what's next? And then my dad was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease here in Utah. And so that was kind of really the impetus to say, I need to pause and figure out what I can do with my life that I feel like is more impactful. And the reason was, again, Randy, I had studied neuroscience, right? I should have known Alzheimer's disease. I studied lots of neuroscience in medical school. I did a lot of neurology and neuroscience. I was in and day out in memory care facilities with these patients, and yet had nothing to offer to my own dad and my own family. And really, the medical system had nothing to offer. And so I had to step out of that and say there has to be a better way to deal with Alzheimer's disease, with chronic disease in general. And that's kind of what led me down the journey to finding the Institute for Functional Medicine, realizing there was training to understand sort of root causes of these chronic diseases, chronic conditions, and learning how to prevent them and treat or reverse them through nutrition interventions, lifestyle interventions, finding key nutritional supplements, and understanding the effects of sleep and stress and relationships and all the things that some of which we'll get into today, and the power behind it. And so we left North Carolina, came here, spent some time with my parents before my dad passed away. And through that process, started our research into building a Brainlift program. It's what we ended up calling it, this kind of program to prevent and reverse Alzheimer's disease. And we're able to write a book in the process. My wife and I, Power Couple Habits. And yeah, since then, we've just been on an ever-evolving journey of trying to understand and live the health that we study, and kind of helping share that process with others.
Well, thank you for sharing that. What I appreciate so much, well, there's so much I appreciate in that, where you describe that you want to live this life. I imagine there's occasions where, I might be meeting with a doctor who may be a bit overweight, and I don't want to necessarily take his health advice or something like that. But if I see somebody living a lifestyle that I hope that I could live, I want to listen to what they have to say, because I feel like they have something to offer because they're doing the work. So tell me a little bit about the journey to develop, partly with your book and developing this Brainlift program. One of the reasons I'm so interested in that, as I've told you before, is my mother several years ago was diagnosed with Alzheimer's as well. And it was really hard, especially for my dad, one, to just the realization that this is Alzheimer's and there's no cure for this that we're aware of. And just seeing what the end may look like for him. He watched his mother suffer the same thing and pass away, and she suffered long. And so now he sees that with my mother. This is my mom. And my dad is so determined. He just said, well, I am all in, full committed, and went and he researched and did everything he could. And he said, all right, well, there's lifestyle changes we're going to make. And they changed their diet. They changed the way they behave, the way they move. And we saw a noticeable improvement in her cognitive ability and her improvement. She started getting really anxious when she realized her memory was slipping. And it's years later, and she's doing great. Now, she still has some memory issues, but it's incredible. It's a miracle.
I love that. So fun to hear those stories. And Randy, when I first learned about, first my dad's diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease, and then I ended up doing my own genetic testing to see what my ApoE status was. The ApoE4 is that higher risk, increases your risk for Alzheimer's disease. And so I wanted to look into that and found that I had one of those two genes. And so again, that was that impetus where I felt like, okay, I've watched so many people go through this process as a physician there in North Carolina. And then I watched my dad go through this process. And I didn't want, number one, to have to go through that myself, to put my family through that. And I knew that the principles that I was learning, that our body was able to heal a lot of things that we just didn't give it enough credit for. And so diving into that research, I found Dr. Bredison at UCLA. Maybe this is some of the research that your dad kind of found. He was one of those pioneers in this field of looking into, is there something we can do from a lifestyle perspective? And his research, as I dove into it before he wrote his book, The End of Alzheimer's, I found that he was having people show reversal of cognitive decline in objective cognitive testing, but also actual structural changes in the brain were being seen. And so I was so excited, and I took all of that research. I basically gathered and took everything and all the supplements that showed benefit and all the lifestyle changes. And we drove up to my parents' house. They lived in northern Utah at the time. And we just basically dumped it on the table and said, just do this, because I figured out how to fix Alzheimer's disease. And needless to say, it didn't work very well. Number one, my parents didn't really love to cook. My dad's taste buds had changed. He really was past the point of having the cognitive ability to understand the need to make lifestyle changes. And number two, it was a lot of pills to swallow. It was a lot of training, cognitive training to try to do. And so it was just a frustrating process that ended after a few weeks. And I realized, okay, we have to do something different. And so over the next couple of years, it took us quite a while. My wife and I studied like habit science and tried to understand, how do you take that mountain of evidence and research, which is really the problem in a lot of conventional medicine. The research is out there, but how do you take that and then implement it in a way where people can, number one, understand the importance of it, and number two, apply it in a way that it can be practical in their lives, that it can make lifestyle changes that are sustainable long term, not like a really hard diet that you can keep up for a few weeks or a month, but something long term, right? And so through that process, we wrote that Power Couple Habits. We found that it works so much better, like your parents, if you can do it together as a couple and make changes together, whether it's a couple or those around you, friends and supportive relatives or family. You kind of have your tribe that supports and walks you through that. That makes it sustainable. So we wrote that process down as we were studying it. And it was it was great. I wrote down a lot of the medical jargon, and then my wife made it understandable and much more enjoyable to read. And then through that process, again, we kind of we found the right technology where it kind of gives people points and they are motivated through the process to follow next steps. So they get one task each day in this Brainlift program. And slowly over a month, they make the nutrition changes. And next over a month, they make maybe exercise and movement changes. And so it kind of takes them through that process. And the other thing we found is that a lot of times people need some type of additional kind of support and guidance, and maybe even a cheerleader or somebody to keep them accountable right through the process, because it's hard. And so having a health coach has been another sort of aspect of the program that's been really helpful for people. And we can dive into any of those kind of parts of the program if you want to, but I just wanted to throw that out, kind of the process that we went through of in our own lives, kind of applying it and then figuring out, okay, how do we make this practical and applicable? And then we got into this side of social media and Instagram, where we found, okay, if making one small change each day is meaningful and helpful, what if we share one small tip or one small thing each day that over time people can start to accumulate as much of this information as they want.
Hello, everyone. I want to thank you so much for listening to the Sparks of Gratitude podcast. If you like what you're listening to, will you please hit that like, subscribe to this, and tell us what you like about it in the comments. That'll help us get great guests and keep this thing going. Now back to our interview. Yeah, and I appreciate that a lot. Now I'm going to bring up something just in the way that you're speaking. You keep using the word we. You said we did this and we did this, and that's really important to me. And my assumption is you're talking about your wife, Amy, right, along the way, that when you say we, that you didn't do any of this alone, you did that with her. And I want to come back to some of the things that you did, but highlight the fact that you're referring to it that way, that you were, I guess, being that power couple, developing this habit system. And how much of that was, each of you pulling each other and pushing and encouraging each other along the way, or how much of a support is she to you?
Yeah, I mean, I told you before, she's been the impetus of me kind of like looking outside of what I typically have done. So my life, I would say in general, maybe because of the system that we all are raised in sort of public school, and then you kind of go into a profession and you just kind of fall into line with whatever people are doing. And so I found myself kind of naturally doing that. And she kept calling my attention, I remember, like to essential oils and to other parts of nutrition and to raw milk and goat's milk. When our son wasn't able to nurse and he was having the eczema and all these issues, she found somebody who had raw goat's milk and we healed him that way. Just all these things, sort of one piece at a time, that made me start to look outside and realize, okay, maybe all the conventional medicine I'm learning has a really important role, but it may not be everything. And I started to look into what else does our body need to be able to function optimally. And so, yeah, she's always been that person that kind of pushes the envelope a little bit, and we balance each other out, I would say, that way. But yeah, it's been a really great process to have her as kind of my partner throughout the whole thing.
That's amazing. I just identify with so much of what you're describing with my wife, and so I love to hear it. So how often do you, because I'll at least explain it with me, my wife will say things and sometimes I'm just like, look, I don't get it, but she said it and I trust her, so okay. I'm like, I've just learned to trust her intuition, and so I'll go with it. But other times I'm kind of pretty resistant and stubborn, and then I eventually learn that no, she was onto something, and I'm so grateful that she was able to be patient with me until I was able to understand what she already knew.
Yeah, for sure.
Or to open my eyes, I suppose. Well, and then you work together to develop over a period of years, and then put this down into a digestible book that could help people to kind of do that on their own, as well as a process that you implement in your practice, which is, the book is called Power Couple Habits, and the system that you use, the format, you call it the Brainlift.
Right. Yep. Brainlift program.
Right. A Brainlift program. Well, tell me a little bit about the book, and people, you can find this on Amazon, or it's easy to find, and it's great. And I've downloaded some of the tools. It's really great. I want to talk about some of them, but
Oh, thank you.
tell me a little bit about the development, or some of the highlights of what this book can help people with.
Yeah, what we tried to do was, again, kind of break down that mountain of ideas out there to say, how do you make that more applicable in your life? And so we kind of did in 5 different areas of your life. And we looked at nutrition, and we looked at kind of movement and exercise and stress and how you optimize the way your body rests or sleeps. We looked at the idea being that, I guess, what shifted things for me in my own life and our journey was going from that sort of go with the flow, more reactive type life into more intentional living. And as I started to see that process play out again and again in my patients, and watching them kind of try to do it on their own versus having a supportive spouse that they're working together with, or a supportive family, then I started to see that if the more that people could sort of live intentionally every single day and set specific goals and work towards specific things, that their results were much better and more sustainable. So yeah, we worked through that process. And again, what we found was that some of the sort of conventional knowledge or information, I should say, what was considered truth at the time around nutrition, was not exactly what the research actually showed, and what was not what was playing out in our patients. So, for example, when we started to write the book, it was still that time of kind of pushing low fat a lot of things. And so we started to kind of push back and look at the research and see how people felt, and realize that really there's a difference between like unhealthy fats and unhealthy oils. And so we dove into that research and then shared how you can implement healthy fats in your life. And that part played into, or there was a direct crossover with the brain health and brain research and prevention of cognitive decline and Alzheimer's disease with healthy fats, and the way that those nourish and provide energy for the neurons or our brain cells. So we just basically took one piece at a time. And through the book, we at that point, we didn't know we were creating a Brainlift program. We were just trying to create and understand the habits that would kind of help overall health and brain health. And then we kind of rolled into this Brainlift program and got more specific and dialed in with brain research. But what we found through that process is we kind of tried to make things real simple with nutrition. So we came down with the 5 F's for the nutrition part, and we did healthy fats and fiber and flavor, which was herbs and spices, kind of really adding antioxidants, anti-inflammatory benefits, the phytonutrients, which isn't an F, but the F sound, kind of the color rich. Yeah, right. That color rich vegetables and fruits, the dark berries and the dark green squash and or dark orange squash and the greens and everything else. And so that phytonutrients are important. The fermented foods are important, and fasting was also important. And so we just dove into each of those. And what we found is people tend to get really excited about something that looks hard, and they'll do it for a little bit, and then they kind of lose their motivation. And so we wanted to find something that people could take, like your parents did, and say, how do we do this right now so that we can prevent progression of this disease, or prevent ever having Alzheimer's disease or other long-term chronic diseases?
So along the way, while you're doing the research and discovering it, I mean, you have this medical background. You're no stranger to diving into the research in the books and getting to work. What's Amy's background?
Yeah, her background was actually more in kind of the visual side. She was art director for a publishing company for a number of years. She had some technical sales and advertising, but she did a lot of editing, and she can just consume information really fast. So where I would, just slowly work through a textbook, she was pounding through books like crazy. And so she accumulated just a lot of information, a lot of knowledge. And then I would kind of take that and check it against research and against my experience and say, okay, this totally jives with, or maybe flies in the face of what I've learned. Let's put it on the shelf and keep learning and figuring out how that plugs in or if there's a place for it. So I think she accumulated a ton of information, a ton of knowledge, and has that voice and ability to make things sound and look a lot better.
Yeah, my guess is she must have been helpful in taking that and condensing it into something digestible.
Yeah, for sure.
And maybe beautiful as well.
Definitely.
So as you're discovering that, were you two taking what you were learning and saying, all right, we'll be our own experiment and we'll start doing it ourselves? Or were you testing it with patients along the way as well?
Yeah, both. A lot of it came from our own experiences where then we said, okay, we've experienced this. Let's see if there's research that backs that up, or we've seen this play out. Let's see if that is research based or not. But for sure, as we learn new things, the way that we eat now is so different from the way that we ate 10 years ago, and still different from the way that we ate 5 years ago. And I think that's okay. That's appropriate, right? To continue to evolve as we learn new things, as we grow. We would be maybe extremely strict or extremely into one thing for a little bit, and then kind of find a balance of how we make that work out in a busy family life. And so, yeah, I think, what we've found, I found it's so critical to be able to give people real life experience, or real life examples, real life kind of practical advice from trying to live the things that you're teaching people.
And so what does a patient experience when they meet with you? And you run a virtual practice as well as a in-person practice, is that right?
Yeah.
And so what's
Yeah.
the
So
experience like when people work with you?
sure. So we do initially a discovery call first, so a 15-minute free call first to make sure that it's a really good fit for people. We don't want people coming in who have one expectation and then realize this isn't what they wanted. And we also want people who are motivated. We want people who understand that we're not in it to give people a simple fix, a pill for every ill. We really want to have people who are interested in learning and growing together in sort of longer term health and investing into kind of their own sort of life and lifestyle. So we do this 15-minute call. If it's a good fit, then we start to work together. So we do an initial consultation. And this is what stepping out of kind of conventional medicine and the insurance realm has allowed us to give kind of the absolute best care to people. Instead of feeling like, okay, we have to see a certain number of people a day, or we have to jump through the specific hoops in the way that we document what we do so that we get paid, which was the case in North Carolina. Extremely frustrating. I spent more time documenting than I did seeing patients. And so now it allows us to just get the information that we find most important and then sort of spend the time really getting to know and connecting with the person. So we do this comprehensive initial consultation. We call it a 360-degree deep dive. So they fill out health journey forms ahead of time, and then we get together either in person or virtually like this through a video call. And we just dive into all of that and try to understand their whole story. Where were they born and what was that like? Were they a C-section? Were they breastfed or formula fed? What was their childhood like? We try to understand not just like typical family history, but like the environment that they were raised in, as well as maybe some genetic predisposition they may have had. We try to understand kind of the stressors they've been through, the things they've been exposed to as far as not just stress, but maybe antibiotics, maybe certain toxins that they've been exposed to. We try to understand the timeline of events of what maybe if they were not breastfed and they had a C-section and then they dealt with a lot of like eczema and asthma as a kid, and then they started to develop an autoimmune disease. And so we try to kind of put that into a timeline so we can say, okay, now we maybe understand some of those triggering events, and we look for some of the, we call them mediators or perpetuators. What else is going on in your life that might perpetuate some of those unhealthy cycles in your body or perpetuate inflammation? Is it that you aren't getting enough sleep, or you have kind of strained relationships and connections with people? Is it that your nutrition maybe isn't ideal because you're so busy and so you live kind of more of a standard American diet? And so understanding each of those concepts in somebody's life we kind of put that all together on a timeline that we present in the second visit. And then at the end of that first visit, we talk together, okay, this is what we think is your situation, the things contributing. This maybe makes sense as far as next steps of trying to understand your health from a lab testing standpoint. We need to look into maybe nutrient deficiencies, inflammatory markers, thyroid or other hormone issues. We may need to look into toxin exposures or blood sugar and insulin. And so we try to individualize that the lab ordering process. And then after they get all the lab testing done, we get back together, have another hour-long video call like this. We share our screen and we just go through line by line. Here's what this lab is. The lab says this is normal. It's not. Here's the real optimal range of where you actually want your body functioning. And so we just go line by line through those. And it's so fun to watch people who are like, oh, that explains why I feel the way that I feel. So many doctors have told me that everything looks normal on their basic lab testing and it's all in my head. And so it's so rewarding to dive deeper and then say, yeah, you're not sleeping because your circadian rhythm is off because of these stress factors that have now led to, look, here's your cortisol. I just did this one yesterday. Here's your cortisol. It should, go up in the morning and then slowly come down through the day. And what's happening for you is it never goes up. It's a flat line all day long. And it's because you've been stressed for so long that your body has been taxed. And we need to start to reverse that process and work with this brain signaling to adrenal glands, stress signaling, and try to help support a healthier, more natural process. And we do that through lifestyle and nutrition and supplements. So anyway, that's kind of the process. We go through all their results, make a nutrition plan, a lifestyle plan, often nutritional supplements. They work with the health coach and they join us in the membership so we can have kind of ongoing support through the process.
Wow, it's very different than a lot of people's experience meeting with the primary care physician.
That's the goal.
Yeah. What is your observation of your patients as opposed to, your prior years in traditional practice? How they receive this. It seems to me that they would feel so heard.
I like that word. It was I remember coming home. I was probably just a few weeks here in Utah, had just gotten into functional medicine. We shifted our practice. I had joined somebody else and this patient, we spent at least 60 minutes and I just listened and jotted things down. And, I was in the back of my mind, I was like, oh boy, there's a lot going on here because I was early in this functional medicine process. But I felt the individual's pain and suffering. And it was, she had been abused as a child and just had dealt with this chronic inflammatory and autoimmune conditions. And we kind of dove into each step of the process of what had happened. I really didn't talk very much at all. And we finished. I said, okay, we'll plan on doing these tests. And then she just starts sobbing and talking about how this was the greatest medical visit she's ever had.
Wow.
And how I made such a difference in her life. And I came home, I was like, okay, that's weird. I did nothing. And I came home and I asked my wife, I was like, how did that happen? I didn't do anything. And she kind of said that was the point, is so many times in medicine, we jump in and sort of put in our own story into the person or don't take the time to understand who they really are. And the word that you said was critical for me to understand was a big part of the healing process is feeling like somebody understands and hears you. And so for me, that was a big shift of being able to say, okay, in order to help really partner with somebody, they need to know that I understand their situation.
And it seems you've created a system that allows you the time to be able to do that optimally.
Yes, it's been great. It's, we don't see a lot of patients in a day. And when we do see kind of back-to-back people, by the end of the day, my mind is pretty heavy with just the amount of stuff that people go through and they're struggling. And what I've found through the process is I've found that sort of typical family medicine, primary care is so much more streamlined and simple because it's more formula based. You have these symptoms, which equal this disease, which equal this prescription. Where what we do in functional medicine is, okay, you are a very unique individual. So we're just going to try to absorb first. And then we're going to try to take all the labs with your history and understand your unique situation, what causes this autoimmune condition for you. And now try to fit kind of lifestyle factors and find a way to help you reverse or fix or prevent this situation. So it can be heavy and hard, but it's so rewarding to come back. It's really makes all the difference in the world to me to come back and to come home and feel like I made a difference in somebody's life instead of just giving them a prescription that maybe helps them to feel better for now. It's really empowering somebody with a tool or the knowledge and tools to kind of take care of themselves, their family for the long term.
Well, maybe speak on that, because you do say that you're dealing with people that are suffering from heavy issues, maybe long-term chronic ailments, and what that may be. But because you're giving them the time, and there's so much, you said it can be heavy, and if you have many of those in a day, that's a lot. But you also said it's so rewarding, and so how much of that overwhelms you, or does it? And is it the rewarding nature of that? Does that sustain you through it, or does that energize you, or are you on a roller coaster through that?
I would say yes to a lot of those things. So, you know, I kind of feel like just my day to day is a bit of a roller coaster. You talk with one patient that maybe you just started working with, and they explain, kind of like this patient, they're just so grateful for you and the effort you've given. And then the next call is somebody who just is really struggling right now, and the things that you recommended were working for a time, but now they ran into this new barrier and they're frustrated or upset. And so you're kind of back to like, oh man, now what do we do with this person? And then, it's kind of ups and downs. And initially, again, functional medicine was hard for me. And I found that I had to have an outlet for myself. So I got into mountain biking, and I love Southern Utah. I love mountain biking. I just had to be outside. So I would see people for a few hours, and then I was outside for 2 hours of lunchtime just to get my mind kind of back into a place where I could absorb and give more of myself. And I found that having some type of intentional process for me is critical. If I'm going to give enough of myself to make a difference for others, I have to be able to kind of reset my mind, set my mind in a place where it's able to do that. And so I know you posted not too long ago around like your morning and evening routines and kind of what you do there, and how you kind of build that sense of gratitude. And for me, it's something similar where I wake up in the morning and I go right into our sauna in the closet, and it allows me to kind of take some time and just focus on maybe some deep breathing and some gratitude thought, study some scripture, and just kind of visualize what's going to happen during the day, and then get out and exercise and cold plunge or cold shower. And that kind of sets my mind and body in a place where I can give people everything that I can, and kind of allow my brain to be there. And then again, still at lunchtime, I'm usually trying to get outside. I think it's critical for me to live in a sunny place because it just re-energizes me. And then in the evening, there are definitely days I don't tend to see patients Fridays. So by Thursday evening, sometimes my wife can just see my shoulders kind of starting to sag. And I know that, I can feel the tension in my neck or my head. And I know that I need to just kind of release some of that and just connect with family. So yes, it's all of those things. I wish I could say I'm really, really good at everything and it's never hard for me, but it is. It definitely, there's some hard days.
Yeah, that must resonate though with your patients, in that, number one, you're doing the work. You have to sustain those habits yourself, and you're not telling somebody to do something you're not willing to do yourself, and that you are doing or trying to get better along the way. So that's very admirable. And part of what you described in those morning routines and so on touches on some of the habits that your book tries to help people develop and encourage. And I mean, there's different categories of habits to help them live a healthy lifestyle. Well, in the type of medicine you practice, you want to focus holistically, right? And so I'd like to touch on some of that, where a lot of your content talks about the mind and spirit, not just the body. So can you talk to me a little bit about that and why that's so important to you, and some practices? And again, this is the Sparks of Gratitude podcast. So, what gratitude means to you in all of this as well.
Yeah, it's also been an evolving process for me, I would say, through that kind of understanding the role of mental health as we dove into that research. And then I I mentioned we started to see people who really struggled with, maybe they had trauma, abuse, or other trauma when they were younger. And I started to see that play out over and over again, where there was a trauma or something that happened, and then later they developed this physical ailment, chronic disease, autoimmune condition. And so I just I was forced really to look into that more and realize, okay, what's the connection between that kind of brain mental health side and things that have happened to us and the way that our whole body kind of responds to that process. Read a number of books and went through the research, and then really was super impressed by what I started to see, that the way that we kind of allow, initially I should say, trauma or hard things, they become kind of hardwired into our brain. And especially if we're not doing something to kind of release that on a daily basis. And so as you go through struggles and trauma, it changes the way that the brain is signaling. I talked about this patient of mine whose cortisol levels were just totally tanked. And they had been through, that couple had been through just some really heavy stress and trauma through a business that they own, through some relationships. So for me, it was kind of watching that process play out in patients and then trying to implement that in my own life. I did some research with the Heart Math Institute with their tools that they use as far as being able to measure getting your kind of neurofeedback or heart rate variability biofeedback, I should say, and see like what's your nervous system doing as you are stressed and worried. And then what about when you do some deep breathing? And then what about when you pull in gratitude? And for me, it was so big. I learned that the brain has this negativity bias. And so if we allow it, if we're not intentionally taking it in a different direction, it's going to go to a place of negativity. It seems like just naturally it tends to have this negativity bias as a protective mechanism. And so when we wake up and we're already thinking about our stressful day and the things that we have to do and worried about maybe some conversations that we had with somebody yesterday and worried about maybe finances or whatever it might be, then our brain stays in this place of negativity and stress and fight or flight. And we actually, through the research, I realized there are specific things we can do to take it out of that. We don't have to use a prescription medication to take your mind out of that place of anxiety. Now, there are some people that we need prescriptions for sure. But for most people, we're able to kind of give them tools. And I found for myself, as I was saying, as I was feeling that weight and stress on my own self and through some of the heavy things that we've been through, to be able to implement gratitude was life-changing for me. And I'll just tell you one sort of process that I figured out for myself and through the research. So I started to notice we started writing it in a 5-minute journal, and we'd start the day with gratitude and end the day with gratitude, kind of like you were talking about. And then I started to notice through that process, as I was kind of pondering on it, maybe praying about it and expressing gratitude, if I just physically smiled as I did that, it changed the way that my brain interpreted what was happening around me. And it's just such a simple thing that you can do. But as you start to ponder on like maybe a loved one or something kind that somebody did for you, or the blessings that you have, and you just smile, it adds to the brain's interpretation of positivity. And it changes over time. The more that you do it, the way that your brain is wired. So I learned from way back in my neuroscience degree that nerves that fire together wire together. And so if we have a negative situation that's related to a relationship, our work, things we're doing on a daily basis, then every time we do that thing, our brain is interpreting this negativity and stress. But if we instead maybe if we're going through a difficult relationship and we instead say, okay, I'm going to focus on positivity about my spouse or about my son or daughter. And so you smile and you think positive things as you think about that person. It actually changes the neural connections in your brain so that next time when you interact with them, maybe not next time, maybe 30 times from now or 50 times from now, it starts to change the way that your brain is interpreting the things that they're doing or the things that are happening to you. And so just such powerful tools that I realized we could give people that and allow them to make changes in their lives, not just from their mental health standpoint, but also in their physical health.
Well, and so it sounds like you prescribe or that's part of the process. The brain lift is to implement some practice of positive thinking and gratitude.
It is. Yeah. In fact, we start the very first week before we do anything else. We start with mindset and we say, where do you imagine yourself? Where is your optimal health, your optimal self in 5 years, in 10 years? And then we keep that person as like, this is you. You need to sort of take that into yourself and that start to shift the mindset from like, I wish I could do this, I wish I could be this, to this is who I am. And you implement sort of this daily gratitude, this daily intentional living, and it changes, again, the way that that brain is signaling. So whether it's the Brainlift program or people coming in for autoimmune disease or whatever else they're coming in for, they're just looking for longevity. We also have a lot of people just come in who are already healthy and just wanting to optimize and prevent issues and have sort of the optimal longevity, and mindset and positivity and gratitude tools are a critical part of all of those.
Well, I really love the imagined future self of saying, who do I want to become? And then step back and say, no, that is me. And I think you saw this. I've added something to my daily gratitude practice in the last year or so, where instead of the what I've done for years, I added one little thing where every day I write a sentence or two, which is a conversation to my future self, which has been such a fun process, because really some of the times I'll be writing a conversation to my future self saying, hey man, I'm getting you there. Like I'm doing the habits, and I'm helping you become who you are. And sometimes I'm really just like reaching out for a hand of support because I'm saying, how in the heck did you get there? Because this is really hard right now. Yeah. But the idea that I'm imagining that is something I'm becoming, it makes it real, and that I'm actually having that conversation. So for me, that's been a process that works. It seems like that's similar to what you described.
Yeah, I saw that in your post, and I thought, oh, that's amazing. I need to start doing that myself. I feel like that's sort of next level as far as like imagining it, but also writing it down and thinking about it, and having regular conversations with that future self is genius. I'm going to steal that from you if
Yeah,
that's
and
okay.
it adds about 60 seconds to my practice, so it's not a big task. Well, coming to that with daily practices and so on, thank you so much for sharing all of this. I'm so grateful for your time. Is there anything that you might highlight for us? Maybe some top 3 habits or highlights or pillars that people could take away, maybe from your book, that they could implement?
Yeah, I would say, since we've spoken so much about gratitude, I'm going to leave that one aside, but that is definitely one of our top
You can
3.
talk more about
Uh,
that. Trust me, you're in the right venue for that one. But
I
yeah,
know.
you go where you're going.
I'll give a few other tools out there for people. So I would say, if there are a couple other things, maybe we'll do 3 other things. So number 1, we did talk about nutrition a little bit. We talked about the 5 F's. One of the things that we find with people is their relationship with food is a problem. They either look at it as like just a reward system. So they eat and they kind of let their body dictate that reward system. And so it's sugar and processed foods and things that feed kind of that give you that immediate boost and high. And they don't realize that it's kind of in some ways a food addiction. I also see this a lot in functional medicine. People develop almost a fear of food, and it's this sort of negative relationship because they don't know what to eat. Food, it causes their gut to be inflamed, or they don't feel good when they eat a lot of different foods, and they don't know which ones are causing problems. And so then they almost just hate eating, and they have to eat to survive, but they develop this negative relationship that way. And so I think number 1 is just finding a meaningful relationship to just see food as sort of this positive, good thing, this nourishing thing. There may be some foods that your body can't handle right now. It doesn't mean that food is bad or that food in general is bad. It means that we need to find a way to help your body to work with that food in a different way, maybe take it out for a time. But developing a positive relationship with food, a meaningful, purposeful relationship with food as medicine, food as healing, not as just kind of this way to kind of make yourself happy and give into the natural sort of desires of your body, but that you can have a control over that. And one thing that I found with myself is the more that you fuel yourself with the right things. So we talked about some of those color-rich vegetables, those fermented foods. You start to find that it shifts. What happens is it shifts the bacterial balance in your gut, which shifts the signaling that goes to your brain, which shifts what you crave. And so you'll start to crave and enjoy things that you never thought you would before. people will often ask in social media, they'll say, yeah, I know you eat these things, but I don't think I could ever give this up, this whatever it is, right? And I always tell people, just don't worry about like giving up your favorite food right now. Just start to ease into this really helpful, sort of nutritious, nourishing, uplifting food. And you'll find that your brain just starts to crave different things. And so you may still want to have your favorite cookie or whatever it was, but you won't find that you crave it in the same way. And you might find that there are other things that actually give you a little bit more of a boost that are different from what you're sort of thinking you're going to have to give up right now. So food is a big one, and that relationship with food is big. Number two would be finding ways to move. We talked about intentional, and intentional movements are important. There are a lot of people who will kind of use those two extremes of examples again. There are people who just really don't like to exercise. They consider it a four-letter word. As soon as we start to kind of give some recommendations, they're like, just don't tell me to exercise, whatever you do. I'll do anything else, but don't tell me to exercise. And I always tell people, again, let's change the relationship that you have with exercise. You may remember like this Fit for Life class you had in junior high when you had to run and you just were miserable. I don't know what this sort of negativity is with the exercise for people, but you might have negative experiences. So let's just shift what exercise means for you. Let's say that it might just mean like meaningful movement. It might mean like gardening. It might mean that you are like mountain biking with, like I do, finding some way that is enjoyable for you. If it's a sport, if it's something active, or if it's just like not sitting as much and trying to move throughout the day. If you're at home and you're always doing chores and stuff and you're folding laundry and you're doing other things, that's great. That's movement, right? And exercise. So we have that camp, and just finding ways to say, let's make movement good and meaningful. And then we can add certain things into it to make it even more beneficial. Add some strength training where maybe you're lifting things a little bit more than you were, or balance, or whatever it might be. And then we have those people who kind of take exercise to an extreme, and there are some awesome, amazing extreme athletes. But sometimes what we find is that those people who get stuck in the fight or flight stress response, they tend to be the ones who exercise really, really hard. And so their body never quite gets a break from that stress response. Their cortisol's high, and then their cortisol's high when they're working out because they've really just pushed themselves super hard. And so if you find like you're exercising so hard and you're not feeling good or feeling better, then it might be time to kind of step back and say, maybe I need to implement more kind of restful and rebuilding types of movements into my exercise routine. So movement and nutrition are those two. Let's see, maybe let's just do relationships. I think that one's a really good one. It's it's fun to think about. This has been one that, again, is not typical. Like you go to a doctor and they say, in order to help with your health, you need to work on your relationships. But what I found, especially with brain health, there was such a cool connection with the number of meaningful connections and positive connections you have with other people, and the number of sort of neuron connections that you have in your brain, and the specific pathways that they're turning on. And so as you look at sort of longevity research, we find that the people who have the most and the most meaningful or beneficial or positive relationships tend to be the ones who are living the longest and having the best health span in their life. And so I've shared this multiple times on social media, but finding ways to forgive people, to connect with people daily, to build more of a sense of gratitude and love and appreciation for people around you. And then what happens in cognitive decline or in other health conditions is you start to withdraw a little bit socially because interactions are maybe not as enjoyable. It might be, we talked about this, I did a presentation on this last week around maybe hearing loss is playing into that. And so you start to withdraw a little bit because you can't always understand what people are saying. And so you start to withdraw, or you can't, maybe your brain isn't working as fast, or you don't feel like you're giving as smart and meaningful answers as you used to. And so you start to withdraw. I saw this process play out in my dad very, very keenly. And it really sort of affected, as the more that he withdrew, the more that his cognitive decline progressed. And we see that over and over again with people. but it happens in every aspect of health. The more that you socially withdraw from people, the more that you kind of don't allow people into you and your relationship, the worse off that your health is. And so push against that. Connect with people, make intentional efforts to connect with somebody every day, at least one person, and start to expand that network. And you'll find that the more that you do that and the more you give of yourself to other people, the more that you get in return. And your health, your mental health, and your longevity will all benefit from it.
Well, I appreciate your wisdom there, folks. The three things: reevaluate our relationship with food, with exercise and movement, and with people. We can improve our life there. Thank you so much, Dr. Noorda. I am so grateful for you. You are doing such meaningful work, and I'm so amazed that you and Amy have been able to take on this meaningful challenge and help so many people. And I'm happy that you're doing it, and happy that we get to share some of that with our audience. So everybody, we will put information in the comments here of how you can find Dr. Noorda, his book, and on social media. There's an abundance of content there that is very helpful. He's generous with his wisdom there. So check him out, and we'll talk to you soon, Dr. Noorda. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Randy, and ditto, you and Kathy and your family. You're doing amazing work as well. And just appreciate and hope you can keep that up.
Well, we intend to. So spread goodness, everybody. We love you. We're grateful for you. We'll see you next time.